Welcome to Strange Dimensions. The interface to alternate realities. Contact experiences. And mysterious phenomena. And now your host for Strange Dimensions Radio. Here's Rosemary Ellen Guiley.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Strange Dimensions Radio. I am glad to be here this week. I am gearing up for a really busy Halloween season. It's busy every year, Halloween, for those of us who work in the paranormal. And this year it's going to be another Rubber Hits the Road month. Really looking forward to that. I have 2 coast-to-coast events coming up this month. I'm going to be on Coast to Coast this coming Friday with my friend and co-author, Johnny Zaffis. We are going to be talking with George Norrie about our new book, Demon Haunted, True Stories from the John Zaffis Vault. And that's going to be from 1 to 3 a.m. Eastern and 10 to 12 Pacific time. So do join us and call in with your questions. Then on Tuesday, October 18th, I'm going to be doing my annual Coast to Coast live chat. This is for members of StreamLink, and I've been doing it every year for years. It's a rock and roll hour that I take all questions. And that's going to start at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific. And my big event of Halloween that caps the month is going to be my Black Mirror Scrying event called the Necromantium in Salem, Massachusetts. I do it right before the big Halloween balls there. It's a sellout every year, and it's an opportunity to gaze into a black mirror and contact the dead. So if you haven't tried it, I hope you'll join me in the Mardi Gras of Halloween, Salem, Massachusetts. There's no other place, maybe New Orleans, to be on Halloween. Well, my guest tonight is a good friend of mine and a really accomplished author and researcher, Ken Gerhard. Ken is well known in cryptozoology, and he has a new book out called A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts. And he's got quite a resume of accomplishments. Now, Ken is one of these researchers who believes in getting out in the field. And I get out in the field a lot myself, but I'm just tired looking at all the places that he's been. He is a field investigator for the Center for Fortean Zoology, as well as a fellow of the Pangea Institute. That's a nonprofit organization that helps out the arts and sciences. He's a consultant for several research organizations, and he's traveled the world, literally searching for hard evidence of mysterious animals and legendary beasts, including Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the chupacabra, enigmatic winged creatures, and werewolves. So we're going to be getting into mysterious beasts and encounters with them tonight. In addition to co-hosting the History Channel's TV series Missing in Alaska, Ken has had numerous appearances on other shows. And let me just give you a few of them. Monster Quest, The Real Wolfman, Ancient Aliens, True Monsters, Unexplained Files, Legend Hunters, Paranatural, Weird or What with William Shatner, Monsters and Mysteries in America, True Supernatural, Ultimate Encounters, Monster Project, and Shipping Wars. He's also appeared on many major radio shows, besides this one, Coast to Coast AM. He's been featured in numerous articles in newspapers and magazines. He's contributed to magazines like Fate magazine. I've been an editor of Fate for many years. And he lectures and exhibits at conferences and events all over the United States. He has traveled to 26 different countries on 6 continents and has visited virtually all of the United States. He's an avid adventurer, and he has camped along the Amazon, explored the Galapagos, hiked the Australian outback, and he's visited many ancient and mysterious sites from Machu Picchu to Stonehenge. Now, here's an interesting little footnote, too. Ken Gerhard was born on Friday the 13th, October 1967, exactly 1 week before the famous Patterson Bigfoot footage was shot in California. I think that marks Ken for life as a cryptozoologist, and he got going at a very early age. Ken, welcome to the show tonight. I'm so glad you're here.
Good evening, Rosemary. It's absolutely delightful to be here with you this evening, and thank you for that very nice introduction. I'm gushing here a bit, but I appreciate it.
Well deserved. My gosh, you certainly have put the miles on. Like I said, I do a lot in the field myself, and some years I'm away more than I'm home, but I think you take one of the prizes. You really get out there and turn over all the stones. And we last saw each other at Mothman just a few weeks ago. What a madhouse that was. Your take on Mothman. I know you've been to Mothman before, and this was the 50th anniversary of the Mothman Wave. This annual festival, folks, if you don't know about it, in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, every year to celebrate the Mothman flap of 1966 to 67, the famous winged humanoid, lots of UFO activity. And, what was your perspective this year? I think you probably barely got away from your table.
Yeah, it was really amazing. I wanted to get up and schmooze a little bit with people like you and maybe shop around for a new Mothman T-shirt, but I literally couldn't leave my table. There was just, every time I looked up, there was just a sea of people coming, and I always very blessed to be able to do what I do, and so I therefore feel obligated to be there when people want to come up and express their support or possibly buy a book or something. So, but yeah, it was very well supported, and I think from a sociological perspective, it's really cool, I think, to see such a weird part of American culture embraced to such a large extent, where you would have 10,000 people grace that festival in honor of the weirdness of the Mothman, which is just such an amazing story, in itself.
It really is. I think it's one of the strangest in the paranormal and certainly cryptozoology. And by the way, I wanted to give a shout out to your lovely partner, Jen DeVilliers. I hope that she's doing well with that black mirror she picked up from me. It was lovely to spend a little bit of time with her, and also to see you down there. I barely got a word in with Nick Redfern. Mm-hmm. He was swamped, as we all were. But let's just talk about Mothman for a moment, because you do mention Mothman in several of your books. You've done several others on flying humanoids, mysterious winged beings, monsters of Texas. And you look at Mothman again in the new book, especially from the standpoint of comparing it to other very strange encounters with humanoids with bat wings. And Mothman didn't really have bat wings, but we have this phenomenon of flying humanoids. And what's your take on Mothman?
Well, to me, the really interesting thing about the flying and also frustrating aspect, Rosemary, of investigating flying humanoid accounts is that the eyewitness descriptions are vastly different from eyewitness to eyewitness. I think with Mothman, you perhaps had a little bit of consistency there. Most of the descriptions, at least the early ones, seem to jibe with each other. And then you have a couple other examples, one being the Owl Man in England, which has been allegedly cited on a few occasions. But other than that, I've collected accounts and interviewed many eyewitnesses that have come forward over the past several years. And there are some cases where the descriptions slightly corroborate each other. But for the most part, they're vastly different. Like you said, you seem to have a whole hierarchy of different types of flying humanoid creatures. Of course, you have the Mothman, the Owl Man, and then you have these bat-winged creatures, the man bats, the bat squatch, and then you have some of these flying humanoids are described as having almost, some type of mechanical apparatus, like some kind of control panel on their chest, or the wings look like they're fabricated out of some material, but other features will be non-human. So, it's really hard to, I think, draw any sort of order from it all. But one thing that I would like to propose is that these flying humanoid phenomenon, whatever it is, it's a manifestation of some kind of energy or something, and it basically takes a form that is a familiar to the observer. That is, perhaps it draws from the unconscious mind of the observer in order to construct itself, if you will, into a certain type of form or appearance. And most of these appearances are pretty scary, pretty frightening. So, that's kind of another theory that I mentioned in my Flying Humanoid book, that, perhaps the reason, if you will, if there is a reason behind the formation of these flying humanoids, is the fact that they want to scare the bejesus out of people, that they are either psychic vampires drawing from our emotions and our fear, or perhaps they're guardians of some type and they're trying to warn or protect something.
Some interesting points you brought up about perhaps what we see when we encounter these mysterious creatures is something that we kind of have to make sense out of, that it might have an energy or a form that we're not familiar with, and our brain has to put it into a context that makes sense to us. Mm-hmm. And my talk this year at Mothman was Who is Mothman? This was an elaboration of a talk I gave a long time ago at Mothman, and the subtitle of it was 25 Explanations from the Ridiculous to the Probable. Mm-hmm. And, of course, we had the sandhill crane, people thinking that Mothman was just a big bird. But that is one of the things that I've considered, too, when I've evaluated cases, that we're probably not seeing some of these beings or creatures in their real form. It's how we can make sense out of them. And you've got a couple of winged humanoid cases in a Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts, and one that a woman saw this dark figure with a bat-like wings, and she said it exuded this ominous feeling. And yeah. Does that tie into what you're talking about, where they're like maybe predatory or they're hostile because they're guarding something?
Yeah, that seems to be a prevalent interpretation. The people that have encountered these things are traumatized, essentially, terrified. There's the famous case of the man-bat in Wisconsin that was first investigated by our colleague Linda Godfrey. And the two gentlemen who were incidentally Native American gentlemen that encountered this thing, as soon as this thing exited the scene, it actually dive bombed their car. They could hear this high-pitched ringing noise, and they actually had to pull over to the side of the road and became violently ill. And when they got home, they claimed that their dog was behaving strangely, cowering under the bed, and then there was almost like poltergeist activity manifesting in their house with banging noises and things. So there seems to be just an oppressive, malevolent residue, if you will, that people experience when they encounter these things.
And yet sometimes these mysterious creatures seem almost as startled as we are. And I've often wondered about that, if some of them might be as frightened of us as we are of them. Do you encounter that very much, or does that account for a minority of cases?
I haven't counted that as much. And, again, when you're interviewing an eyewitness, of course, you're taking their interpretation, and it's all from their perspective. And because people are traumatized by these experiences, they may not even really acknowledge that whatever that they're seeing is behaving any particular way. They're just trying to get away from it somehow, But I suppose that's fair to say. There have been a couple of cases, even going back to the Scarberry mallet sighting. The iconic first Mothman sighting. I mean, the description essentially was that this Mothman figure, once they sighted it, it initially, before it ultimately chased them, it initially kind of scrambled away from them and tried to get away from them by going into this power plant building, right? And then it was only later that it kind of reappeared and chased them. So I think that's a fair presumption that these things, whatever they are, they may want to avoid contact with us to some extent.
That does seem to be the case in at least a certain number of them. Ken, you've described yourself as a flesh and blood kind of researcher. What mm-hmm. do you mean by that?
Well, Rosemary, I've always, since I was a young boy, I first caught the bug when I saw a TV show about Bigfoot when I was about 8 years old. But after reading every book I could get my hands on that covered the topic of cryptozoology, Of course, I had curiosity in other unexplained phenomenon. So I did read some of the early books in the 70s and 80s about the paranormal, the Ed and Lorraine Warren, stuff like that. I read a lot of early UFO books. So I was always interested in all aspects of the unexplained, and I still am. I enjoy tagging along on different types of investigations. But as a tradition, I consider myself also to be a traditional cryptozoologist, which means that I have to adhere to the scientific approach methodologies that were laid down by the founding fathers of cryptozoology, who were in fact esteemed zoologists. Dr. Bernard Heuvelmans, Ivan Sanderson, guys like that actually had the credentials, and ultimately zoology is about having a type specimen, and in order to solve a mystery in the case of cryptozoology, you actually do have to have some hard empirical and physical evidence, a body, bones, blood, hair, droppings, something that you can take to traditional scientists and prove conclusively that these things, these creatures, these animal species do exist.
And we come up short so often in the physical evidence department, which of course then leads to the obvious question that some people ask, including me, is, well, maybe we're dealing with something paraphysical or interdimensional. Mm-hmm. And I see in your new book, Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts, that, you do comment on that, and you allow for the possibility, and especially in the Mothman case, that we might be dealing with something that's not physical. But is there much evidence for paraphysical and interdimensional? How do we go about tackling this difficult field of research where we never seem to find anything tangible?
Well, that's a great point, and it's obviously a very popular topic of discussion right now in the field of cryptozoology and the paranormal as well. A lot of paranormal and UFO investigators are getting into cryptozoology now because they feel that, it's more within their comfort zone if we are dealing with perhaps a paranormal element as opposed to just flesh and blood. That said, I think in the big picture, at least of the cases, and I've been researching this my whole life. I've read hundreds of accounts of Bigfoot sightings, lake monster sightings, and so forth. And typically, they're in those categories. The descriptions of these creatures are very natural. You see something moving through the woods or moving through the water. You see it for a few feet, it disappears behind a tree or dives back under the water, or maybe it's foraging for food or whatever. So, those types of accounts, which is again the vast majority of accounts, seem very natural. They seem to be describing a viable animal, basically going about its daily behaviors. On the other hand, when you're looking at things like the Mothman, and I also group Dogman in this category, the Goatman, mermaids, any of these kind of hybrid man-beasts that almost seem mythological. In those cases, I feel that we most certainly have to be dealing with something paranormal, because those designs contradict everything that we know about evolution and anatomy. I mean, you can't combine a human can't grow wings. That just doesn't make sense from an evolutionary standpoint. Humans diverged from bats and other flying mammals, 70 million years ago or something like that. There can't be a dogman. It's impossible unless you have these upright walking canids, which people describe. But even that becomes a problem because canids are not designed to walk on their hind legs. They're just not built that way. So when people bring out the really weird cryptids like that, I typically tend to think that, that we must be dealing with something paranormal. But in the cases of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, lake monsters, thunderbirds, black panthers, a lot of the traditional cryptids I feel that could be viable undiscovered species.
And one of the things that I do appreciate about your research is that you do a good job of explaining how there can be natural explanations. And it's probably disappointing for some folks who really want, a mystery supernatural explanation in many cases. But the fact is that many times sightings and reports of what seem to be mysterious creatures are, in fact, mistaken identities. Mm-hmm. And let's talk about the dogmen and the werewolves for a minute, because that's one of my favorite topics. And you've got a chapter on it in the book. I just want to mention some of the other chapters, folks. Ken covers so many intriguing areas: dragons, enormous eagles, sea monsters, ape men in the Americas, the Minnesota Iceman hoax, which I think remains one of the most interesting cases of hoaxing, creepy crawlies. Got to ask about those giant spiders. And then you end the book with a very intriguing chapter on phantoms, fairies, and mermaids, getting back into this supernatural territory. But dogmen. Dogmen have fascinated me for a long time, and Linda Godfrey and I have had many conversations about dogmen and werewolves. Let's do some distinguishing here. Dogmen, werewolf. What's the difference?
Well, as we had a Dogman symposium, as you know, a few months back. Linda was the keynote speaker, and myself and other researchers that had looked into some of these strange creature reports. Linda is obviously the pinnacle of Dogman research. She's been doing it for so long. She has the most data by far, and definitely the strongest theories and hypotheses based on all that work. I've only done a handful of, what you could refer to as Dogman type investigations, not nearly as much, but I do find it, to be a fascinating subject and within the realm of cryptozoology. Dogman and werewolf, in my opinion, is basically, it's just a cultural interpretation. I mean, the name werewolf is obviously, German wer is human, man, and wolf. Man-wolf is basically werewolf, and dog-man is basically, the words are reversed. Dogs and wolves are genetically extremely close. They can, in fact, breed and have babies. So, I mean, werewolf, I think, is more of a traditional European interpretation of what these creatures, which have obviously been around for a long time. And dogman is kind of just like the new modern interpretation that people have dusted off and are using here in the American Midwest. But I think they definitely apply to essentially canid-like creatures that at times appear to have, human-like or humanoid characteristics. And similar to other cryptids, they tend to have very nasty dispositions and are often seen chasing people or popping up out of the darkness or feasting on roadkill, clawing people's cars and the like.
And how close are they to what we get out of film and fiction? The change at the full moon and, this morphing of the physical body. Is that the kind of werewolf we're talking about here, or are we talking about a different kind of entity?
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about lycanthropy, which is what you're kind of referring to there. And I think a lot of that obviously is due to the success of werewolves in different Hollywood movies and books and so forth. So we definitely all have this kind of filtered down interpretation of what a werewolf should be. The shapeshifters, there are obviously Navajo traditions, Native American traditions of skinwalkers. There are European traditions of like the berserkers of humans taking animal-like characteristics on. But as far as I know, with any sightings of the dogman, no one has actually seen a dogman transforming into a human or vice versa. The only interesting sidebar to that is that in the case of the Defiance werewolf, and Defiance was the little town in Ohio where we had our Dogman symposium, the Defiance werewolf encountered in 1972 was said to be wearing blue jeans and tattered clothing.
All right, a fashionable dogman.
It very well may have been a hoax in the big picture. There's also an account in my new book about a Polish werewolf that was described as wearing tattered peasant-like clothing. So, but those cases are pretty small in the paradigm of dogman and werewolf reports. The full moon, that could certainly play a part in. Probably more from a perspective of how we feel about encountering monsters and what the full moon represents, as far as animal behavior, humans behaving strangely. The silver bullet, for example, is something that came out of a case that I investigated in France. There's something known as the Beast of Gevaudan, which was a werewolf that allegedly killed as many as 100 people back in the 1760s. And this creature was finally shot, it is said, with a silver bullet that was blessed by a priest. And I think, excuse me, I think Hollywood probably lifted that silver bullet idea from that particular case, and it's just grown to be part of werewolf lore because of movies and books and the like.
And to, I feel, a rather exaggerated extent. Ken, we've got to take a short break right now. When we come back, I want to pick up some more about dogmen and dragons and sea monsters, some of my favorite topics. Ken, your website where people can go to get more information about you and your books.
Yes, much appreciated. It is kengerhard.com, KenGerhard.com.
Thank you, and we'll be right back. Stay with us, Ken Gerhard, on Mysterious Beasts. You're listening to Strange Dimensions on KGRA, www.kgraradio.com. We'll be right back.
If your home has hard water, then it's likely that limescale is clogging your pipes, damaging your appliances, costing you hundreds of dollars each year. You can eliminate limescale in the entire house with HydroCare products available at Wave Home Solutions. Easy and efficient with no maintenance, no salts, no chemicals, and no coils. And you can buy with confidence from Wave Home Solutions. Performance guaranteed. Just go to bestwater411.com. That's bestwater411.com.
Well, Jason, I've got to tell you, you're pretty much everything this company is looking for in an entry-level candidate.
Great.
Your resume isn't quite what we're used to, but you've got a fantastic work ethic.
Thank you.
And I'm impressed by how you carry yourself.
So, should we talk about the job?
What? The job? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have no way of recruiting or even meeting you. This interview didn't happen.
It may sound ridiculous, and that's because it kind of is. There's a huge pool of talent your company is missing out on. Meet the grads of life. Who are they? Talent worth knowing about. Young adults of unique determination and experience. An ideal fit for your company in an entry-level position, internship, or even mentorship. They might not have every qualification you typically look for, but they're exactly who your company needs.
Man, we really could have used him.
Don't miss out on a resource many innovative companies have already discovered. Go to gradsoflife.org to learn how to find, cultivate, and train this great pool of untapped talent. Brought to you by the Ad Council and gradsoflife.org.
Do you know what's in your body soap? Well, I didn't know the answer until about 5 years ago when I looked at the label of my soap and was shocked to see all the chemicals. For my entire life, I had been assaulting the largest organ of my body, my skin, and to think my children were using it too. Well, a lot has changed since then. Today, my family and I operate Stone City Farms, where we make and sell all-natural goat milk soap using fresh goat milk from goats we raise on our farm. Our mission at Stone City Farm is to produce high-quality, all-natural goat milk soap for people who want a fresh, unrefined, natural product. At Stone City Farms, we offer scented and unscented soaps and a signature line of gift sets customizable to your needs. To see what our customers are saying, go to StoneCityFarm.com. Use the code NATURAL for a 20% discount. That's StoneCityFarm.com, code NATURAL for 20% off your order. You never know what could be hiding in your soap.
Need traffic to your website or blog? CallTheFirm.com can quickly and easily expose your site on the first page of major search engines from just $39.95 a week. Choose from Google, Yahoo, or Bing search networks. Your site or blog can be found on the keywords that matter, and you pay as little as $39.95 per week, 4-week minimum order. Open a browser now and visit CallTheFirm.com for all the details. Get the online exposure your site needs by visiting CallTheFirm.com. That's CallTheFirm.com.
Your UFO paranormal powerhouse of live alternative talk radio. KGRA, The Planet.
Welcome back back, ladies and gentlemen, to Strange Dimensions Radio. My guest tonight, Ken Gerhard, who is a well-known cryptozoologist, author of numerous books and articles on his research in the field. He has a new book out. We're talking about it tonight, A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts. It's got some fascinating cases in it. And right before the break, we were talking about dogmen, one of my favorite topics. Ken, before we get back into dogmen, I just want to ask you, because folks want to know what's happening with Missing in Alaska.
Oh, well, thank you so much for bringing that up. Missing in Alaska, we filmed one whole season, 13 episodes, and sadly now I have to say that we are in a state of hiatus, and it's probably not looking good. There's been a change of management, change of leadership at the History Channel, and they're kind of shaking things up and reevaluating their programming. And the last I heard, the new regime was not as into the shows about the paranormal and the unexplained. So they're kind of enjoying their current trend of Pawn Star type shows, which has done quite well for them. So we are, we're airing around the world. We're in syndication, which I think is very exciting. I'm getting a lot of positive feedback from Asia, Australia, South America, and other continents. For fans of Missing in Alaska, we really appreciate your support. We had a great time doing the show, but I don't think there are going to be any new episodes on the horizon.
Well, don't give up, because shows do have a way of resurrecting after a hiatus, and it is an excellent show. So I really am glad to see it in syndication there and still gaining an audience. Right before the break, Ken, you mentioned the Beast of Gevaudan in France, a famous werewolf case from, I believe, the 1700s. And you went to France to research it. What was your conclusion? If you could just also explain, what went on in that case and what your conclusion about it was.
Well, yes, absolutely. It's a very famous case. As you said, it's from the 1760s. The Gevaudan region of France is in southern France. It's one of the most remote and uninhabited areas, even today in Western Europe, mountainous region. And back in the 1760s, a menacing wolf-like beast appeared. It began attacking people, killing people. It had a modus operandi, that is, it would typically target women and young people, children who were out herding flocks herds of cattle, goats, sheep, whatever. Strangely, it never attacked the livestock, only the humans. The killings were pretty grisly. People were decapitated, eviscerated, and it was very, very strange case, because wolves, and there were wolves in France at that time, wolves are not known to attack humans, at least not in this way. But anyways, it basically became a situation where you had mass hysteria in southern France. The King Louis XV sent out soldiers and professional wolf hunters to try to kill this thing. The Roman Catholic Church got involved. Ultimately, after about 2 years of these killings and attacks, there was an animal killed by a gentleman named Jean Chastel, who was a skilled hunter who lived in that region, and that's where the silver bullet story apparently comes from. He had these silver bullets forged and blessed, according to some accounts. But anyways, this beast was taken, paraded around the region, and then ultimately taken to King Louis XV, and then the remains kind of disappeared at that point, or there's a bit of a mystery there. So the animal was described as being a wolf-like, but much larger than a wolf, with a long tail, pointy ears, and a stripe down its back, kind of shaggy fur. So I had the opportunity in 2009, 2010 to travel to France for a History Channel special called The Real Wolfman. And they actually paired me up with a homicide detective, because one of the theories involving the Beast of Gevaudan, that in fact it was a serial killer, either dressed up like an animal or perhaps employing animals to do its bidding. So it's a pretty complex case, as you can see. Very famous in France and throughout Europe. It's kind of like their version of Bigfoot almost. I don't know if I want to. Well, I guess I can give a spoiler because it's been a few years. Ultimately, we came to the conclusion that perhaps there was a human involvement on some level. That perhaps there was either a serial killer perhaps even Jean Chastel himself had staged the whole thing, or perhaps there was involvement by King Louis and the church, a bit of a conspiracy or a cover-up. Ultimately, the creature that was shot, we believe, was in fact an African hyena. Hyenas are somewhat wolf-like in appearance, but moreover, they're extremely aggressive compared to wolves. They have an incredible bite pressure, capable of decapitating a person or breaking off a limb. And they can be they're very intelligent and can evidently be trained as well. And lo and behold, there are rumors that Jean Chastel's son actually owned a hyena in one of his menageries. So anyways, it's a pretty complex case, but I think that it could be interpreted as a case of misidentification involving an animal that perhaps was not as familiar to people in that region. But moreover, I think that you have to say, with 100 and some people killed, that it wasn't just an animal, that there probably was some other diabolical person or organization that was taking advantage of the mass hysteria, the fear at that time, and perhaps using the beast as a front to commit other murders.
What a fascinating case. And here again, an example of how the natural and even a human element here figure into something that has all the outward appearances of something supernatural. And when you peel away the layers, it gets to be a different story. But here's a little twist for you. And this is one of those peculiar things that we just find in the field. About 2 or 3 years ago, I got a report of a weird dog or dog man or werewolf sighting in upstate New York, and I followed up on it and did some interviewing. And one of the principal witnesses described this beast to me that she had seen, and she said that it had even followed her for a while she was out walking one evening. And I recognized what she had described, and I got out a book that had one of those old woodcuts in it of the beast of Gevaudan, and I showed it to her, and I said, "Was this it?" And she said, "Yes, it is." She said, "That's it exactly." She had never seen the woodcut before, never heard about the beast of Gevaudan. So do we pull these things from a collective memory? Is this another case of, projecting a form onto something that we're trying to grapple with? Did the beast enter our collective consciousness?
Well, first of all, that's a great story, Rosemary. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think that's something that's been discussed. I think when we had our speaker panel at the Dogman Symposium, we kind of that hypothesis kind of sprung up that perhaps some of these creatures, like the Dogman, and maybe even the things like the Mothman or Bigfoot or other creatures on some occasions, maybe they are in fact thought projections, constructs that we all essentially have come from all of our collective consciousness. This is, of course, Jungian theory. Of philosophy, that we're all connected and that we all have kind of shared imagery, if you will, of the reality that we've constructed around us. And that sometimes that we can actually, maybe one person reports seeing something, and then suddenly it's as if this thing kind of takes a life of its own. And it's, there's a flap or a grouping of sightings, the descriptions, and so forth. I don't think that we can rule out that possibility that some of these creatures that I investigate, that you investigate, are in fact born in the deep recesses of the global consciousness.
It certainly makes for some interesting perspectives for researchers to take into account. Okay, Ken, I've got to ask about dragons now, another one of my favorite topics. And an intriguing chapter you've got on dragons. 15 years old you were, trekking around Switzerland with your dad looking for the tatzelworm. Did I pronounce that correct? Tatzelworm?
Yes, very good.
And are there plausible explanations for dragons, these fire-breathing wing things that we have in mythology? Do they really exist?
Well, the fascinating thing, of course, about dragons is that it's one of the most prevalent creatures in all of the mythologies around the world. Pretty much every culture around the globe has some type of dragon, from Chinese to Europe to, Native American, whatever. Now, just like you did with the Mothman, I'm not going to do a 1 to 25. Maybe I'll do like a 1 to 3 or 4. The most probable explanation for legends of dragons are encounters with outsized reptiles. There are species of Indo-Pacific crocodiles that can be 30 feet, 25, 30 feet long. There are giant snakes on our planet capable of reaching 25 to 30 feet. So you can imagine in bygone days when people encountered these giant reptiles, the Komodo dragon, things like that, would often, basically tell a story, and maybe it became a dragon. The second possible explanation is that some of our ancestors found fossil remains of dinosaurs, and that they saw these dinosaur bones or fossils or skeletons, and basically they said, these are the bones of a dragon, and that these many dinosaurs, of course, were very dragon-like, very large, scary, and reptilian. But interestingly enough, there are modern sightings of giant reptile-like creatures that can't be neatly classified, or at least can't be identified in the world of zoology. And so, for example, you mentioned the Tatzelwurm is a famous story from the Swiss Bavarian Alps of this reptile-like creature that lives high up in the mountains, and it's also called the spring worm because it'll actually spring onto people, and some interpretations of the story say it actually can spit venom or fire. But throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, there were many accounts of dragon-like creatures in Europe. We're not talking about the medieval times. We're not even talking about, the Renaissance times. We're talking about 1800s, 1900s, villagers in places like France and Italy describing these ostensible dragons. And then even in here in North America, there are cases, for example, here in South Texas where I live, there have been a number of recent sightings or claims of what are described as looking like small dinosaurs running around, like velociraptor-type dinosaurs running around on their hind legs, 3 to 5 feet tall. There's something called the Canip Creek or the Milton lizard that's been described from a little town in Kentucky. And these two brothers that owned an auto salvage yard described seeing this 15-foot-long lizard-like creature slithering through some of the abandoned cars in their property. There's a famous account that I really like about a farmer in South Dakota being run off the road. He was driving his tractor down the road, and he claimed a dragon ran him off the road and then disappeared into a lake. And strangely enough, some of his livestock had been disappearing mysteriously around that time.
I like that.
Yeah. So, these stories aren't as well known, obviously, as things like Bigfoot, Mothman, chupacabra. But if you dig into cryptozoology, you find these accounts. And, even people still can continue to contact me and tell me that they've seen these giant reptilian creatures in places like North America and Europe, where you really should have no large reptiles. You're not talking about Africa and New Guinea. And I didn't even write about it in the book, but of course you also have something in Africa known as the Mokele Mbembe, which lives supposedly in Lake Tele and the Likwala rivers and deep in the Congo. And the native people there describe it as looking essentially like a giant apatosaurus type of dinosaur, like something right out of Jurassic Park. Some of my colleagues have gone out there to mount investigations there. So perhaps if you had surviving pockets of dinosaurs, pterosaurs and pterodactyls, I get a lot of sightings of those. Perhaps these could explain to some respect the dragon mythologies around the world.
So we might be dealing with a combination. Is this another case, a combination of real physical creatures that belong to Earth and yet some unexplained, possibly supernatural ones?
I think so. I think that's a fair assumption. It's hard to... again, as someone that tries to follow zoology and the fossil record, when you have a gap of 65 million years ago, for example, for pterosaurs, pterodactyls, flying reptiles, you have that 65 million year gap, and then suddenly you get a flurry of people describing them in Georgia and Tennessee, which is actually in my book. It doesn't really make sense from a biological point of view. So then you have to entertain some of these alternative suggestions. Maybe they are some type of manifestation. Maybe they're related to the flying humanoids, another form, if you will. And I'm not maybe qualified to talk about this, Rosemary, but maybe it's some type of time travel situation. Maybe we're seeing animals that lived millions of years ago, and maybe for a brief instant they're appearing in our time-space continuum.
Well, this consideration of time travel as an explanation is cropping up more and more when it comes to mysterious encounters. And I think we're going to be seeing more consideration of this in future research as we understand more about the malleability of time and our ability to move around in time. Mm-hmm. And that argument has been advanced about aliens and extraterrestrials for quite some time. And it may account for things like even Mothman, flying humanoids, these mysterious creatures that they're beings out of time when we encounter them.
Absolutely.
You make the observation in your book about sea monsters that if we're going to look anywhere on the planet for mysterious beings, underwater is one of the best places.
Oh,
and I was very interested in your comments on the Loch Ness Monster and similar sea serpents, as maybe they were amphibians. You called Nessie maybe a Titanic newt. What can we say about the sea monster phenomenon in terms of real or supernatural?
Yeah, well, similar to Bigfoot or Sasquatch or the Yeti, what's really compelling to me about sightings of lake monsters and sea monsters around the world is that all of the descriptions are extremely similar. You have a long body of data as far as accounts dating back centuries, ship's captains in the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries describing these so-called sea serpents, which I don't really think are serpents at all, but we can get into that. Basically giant serpentine animals with vertical undulating motions, long neck, small head, sometimes described as having fur or whiskers or manes of hair. But these animals have been described all over the world for centuries by ship's captains and mariners. And then in modern times, you have sightings in Loch Ness, Scotland, Lake Champlain, some lakes in Canada, Ogopogo, lakes in Scandinavia, Russia, Japan. And again, all over the world, the descriptions are spot on. They are always corroborating each other as far as the general appearance, the general model or archetype of these animals. So to me, that's very compelling evidence that whatever these sea monsters are, they do exist. And, even the most conservative scientists, as you kind of inference there, will acknowledge that the Earth's surface is 71% covered by deep water that's 12,000 feet deep. And we literally don't know anything about what lies beneath the surface. So there could be all kinds of things deep in the ocean that we haven't seen yet, life forms. Some of them have been discovered. Many new species of beaked whales, large sharks, and so forth have been discovered in the past decades, in recent times. So as far as the Nessie theory, the reason I brought that up is because there is kind of a prevalent image of the Loch Ness Monster as a plesiosaur, which is this long-necked reptile that lived, 65 million years ago. And they were very prevalent in the Earth's oceans. But there are some biological problems with that, namely that a reptile would not acclimate well to the cold, frigid waters of Loch Ness and other cold lakes. And furthermore, reptiles have to come up for air quite frequently. So if you had a population of plesiosaurs in Loch Ness, they would be constantly coming to the surface and you would see them more often. So I brought up the amphibian theory, which is not new. It's been around since the 1930s. Some of the original investigators of the Loch Ness Monster proposed that Nessie might be some kind of giant newt. A newt is, of course, an amphibian. Amphibians, unlike reptiles, can actually exchange oxygen and gases through their skin. So they can stay submerged for very long periods of time. And they also will acclimate to cold water environments better than reptiles will. For example, you have the giant salamanders in Japan and China, which like cold water streams. So I was just kind of throwing it out there as an alternative theory that maybe we need to look at other possibilities as far as Nessie. If Nessie exists, maybe it's not the type of animal that we're envisioning.
Well, it certainly makes for an interesting case of sea monsters as being part of the family of creatures on Earth and just unexplored and probably undiscovered to a large extent rather than supernatural. I have to ask about the creepy crawlies. Mm-hmm. The 11-inch spider seen going up a tree. Are these for real?
I hope not.
Listen, demons and jinn, no problem. Spiders, I'm out of there.
That's funny. It's funny that we all kind of have that place where we draw the line, Rosemary. I think I posted a couple of weeks ago that I was okay with Bigfoot and lake monsters, but scary clowns in the woods. That's kind of where I was going to draw the line. But there are accounts of giant invertebrates and insects. They're not as well known, of course, as other cryptids. But I, for example, had a gentleman in Georgia contact me a couple years ago. And this guy, his name is Chris Williams. He is actually a fireman and an EMS emergency worker. So he saves people's lives for a living. So you got to think this guy has probably got it together. He seems very straightforward. And he basically, during the course of our phone interview, he confided in me that he had encountered this spider in his backyard that he said was as big as a house cat. And he said it was crawling. He was mowing his lawn, and he bumped the lawnmower into the tree, and suddenly he caught something in his peripheral vision scurrying up the tree. And when his eyes adjusted and when his mind finally made sense of what he was seeing, what he saw was a spider that was about 11 or 12 inches across, about as big as a dinner plate. And, of course, he was terrified. He was worried that the spider was going to jump on him, but he wanted to get a proof that it existed because he knew that this was something crazy that he was seeing. By the time he ran inside to get his phone, his camera, the thing was gone. But there are other accounts of giant spiders in Louisiana, Florida, and elsewhere. They're pretty rare, so people, all the arachnophobics out there listening can put your mind at ease. Moreover, Rosemary, there are some, again, biological problems with spiders of that size. Now, 11, 12 inches across, that's about the size of a Goliath bird eater, which is a tarantula from South America. But what would a tarantula from South America be doing in Atlanta, Georgia, crawling up a tree? So I guess it could be an escaped pet or something like that. I doubt there's a population of these things doing very well anywhere in North America. Certainly we'd be hearing about them more often. There are also physical limitations as far as how big spiders can get. They're built, arthropods are built very differently from us, and they have hard physical limitations because of their circulatory system, respiratory systems, and muscle structures and so forth. So they can't get too big, thank goodness.
Well, maybe that's good from a physical standpoint, but what about those supernatural giant spiders, invasions from outer space? We could spin some pretty wild stories here, I think. Ken, we've got just a few minutes left, and ladies and gentlemen, Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts is just chock full of fascinating stories and cases. And again, I'm just really amazed at all the places you've been and personally checked out, Ken. Ken, once again, your website where folks can go to learn more about you and find out what you're doing. What have you got coming up in the next few weeks?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, of course, Rosemary, for having me on. Some wonderful questions. Always have a great time on your show, and hopefully we can do it again real soon. My website is kengerhard.com. People can also find me on Facebook, Ken Gerhard, Cryptozoologist. My new book, A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts, is available at Barnes & Noble locations or online at Amazon.com and other major online book retailers. And if people, as far as upcoming appearances, I will be appearing next weekend, October 8th, at the Arkansas Paranormal Expo in Little Rock, Arkansas. That's at the Mark MacArthur Military Museum, which is haunted, supposedly, if anyone out there in Arkansas is listening. 2 weeks, or the week after that, I will be at the Texas Bigfoot Conference, which is going to be in Jefferson, Texas. That's a long-running event with a really good turnout. And, I guess that's it for the year, Rosemary. It sounds like you've got a busy schedule ahead, and I wish you the best of luck, as always.
Well, thank you, Ken, and I look forward to the next time our paths cross on down that paranormal road. So we're winding it up tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us for a fascinating conversation with Ken Gerhard on mysterious beings. You've been listening to Strange Dimensions Radio on KGRA, www.kgrradio.com. My guest next week, Mike Cleland. We're going to be talking about owls and ETs. Now, stay tuned for Fade to Black with Jimmy Church. Good night, everyone.